Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for taking the time once again to be here. Listen to the videos, check out the presentations. I really appreciate that. Today, we're going to get into some more history here on giants in ancient America and as well as pygmies. We have gone over much information already on giants and pygmies and on ancient America. So, this is just more icing on the cake and from some pretty scholarly sources here, all right? Apart from the giant and the pygmy findings, also discuss how they were being buried, the details of how they were wrapped, what position they were laying, with what they were buried with, resembling many of the old world cultures. So we're going to read a little bit about that as well today. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let's go ahead and get into the video. Thanks for being here once again. We're going to get into this book first. It says here, The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee up to the first settlements therein by the white people in the year 1768. All right, so dodge the hijack when they're saying white Europeans. This is by John Haywood, and this is from 1823, all right, all the way from 1823. We go to page 193 of this book, chapter 8. Says here, though what is said in this chapter is made to relate to the Aborigines as the preceding chapters have, yet one opinion, if not the better one, refers the articles of this chapter to those northern conquerors who overran the old world, and who seem also to have passed over to this continent in pursuit of their chief business, the trade of war and desolation. All right, so they might be possibly talking about the Vikings, all right? Might be seeing it in reverse. But whether more appropriate to the primitive or these secondary aborigines will be submitted to the judgment of the learned reader. We will examine first into their size, secondly into their history of their pygmies, thirdly into their martial music. First, then, of their size. This is ascertained by the length and dimensions of the skeletons which are found in East and West Tennessee. These will prove demonstratively that the ancient inhabitants of this country, either the primitive or secondary settlers, were of gigantic stature, all right, giants, compared with the present races of Indians. On the farm of Mr. John Miller of White County are a number of small graves, and also many large ones, the bones in which show that the bodies to which they belong when alive must have been 7 feet high and upwards. About the year 1814, Mr. Lawrence found in Scarborough's Cave, which is on the Calf Killer River, a branch of the Caney Fork, about 12 or 15 miles from Sparta, in a little room in the cave, many human bones of a monstrous size. He took a jawbone and applied it to his own face, and when his chin touched the concave of the chin bone, the hinder ends of the jawbone did not touch the skin of his face on either side. He took a thigh bone and applied the upper end of it to his own hip joint, and the lower end reached 4 inches below the knee joint. Mr. Andrew Bryan saw a grave opened about 4 miles northwardly from Sparta, on the Calf Killer Fork. He took a thigh bone, and raising up his knee, he applied the knee joint of the bone to the extreme length of his own knee, and the upper end of the bone passed out behind him, as far as the full width of his body. Mr. Lawrence is about 5 feet 10 inches high, and Mr. Bryan about 5 feet 9. Mr. Sharp Whitley was in a cave near the place where Mr. Bryan saw the graves opened. In it were many of these bones. The skulls lie plentifully in it, and all other bones of the human body, all in proportion and of monstrous size. All right, giant bones, guys. This is not a tabloid book we're reading. This is an actual anthropological book. Human bones were taken out of a mound on Tennessee River below Kingston, which Mr. Brown saw measured by Mr. Sims. The thigh bone of those skeletons, when applied to Mr. Sims' thigh, were an inch and a half longer than his, from the point of his hip to his knee. Supposing the whole frame to have been in the same proportion, the body it belonged to must have been 7 feet high or upwards. Many bones in the mounds there are of equal size. Suppose a man 7 or 8 feet high, that is, from 18 inches to 2 feet taller than men of the common size. Suppose the body broader in the same proportion, also his arms and legs. Would he not be entitled to the name of a giant? Colonel William Shepard, late of North Carolina in the year 1807, dug up on the plantation of Colonel Joe Lewis, 2 miles from Nashville, the jawbones of a man which easily covered the whole chin and jaw of Colonel Lewis, a man of large size. Some years afterwards, Mr. Cassidy dug up a skeleton from under a small mound near the large one at Bledsoe's Lick in Sumner County, which measured little short of 7 feet in length. Human bones have been dug up at the plantation where Judge Overton now lies, in Davidson County, 4 miles southwesterly from Nashville, in making a cellar. These bones were of extraordinary size. The underjaw bone of one skeleton very easily slipped over the jaw of Mr. Childress, a stout man, full-fleshed, very robust, and considerably over the common size. These bones were dug up within the traces of ancient walls, all right, ancient walls, in the form of a square of 200 or 300 yards in length, situated near an excellent, never-failing spring of pure and well-tasted water. The spring was enclosed within the walls. A great number of skeletons was found within the enclosure, okay? Listen to what they're finding here, buried in Tennessee, guys. Walls, ancient walls with skeletons of people 7 to 8 feet tall. A few feet below the surface of the earth, on the outer side were the traces of an old ditch and rampart thrown up on the inside. Some small mounds were also within the enclosure. There was even small mounds inside these things. At the plantation of Mr. William Shepard, in the county of Giles, 7.5 miles north of Pulaski, on the east side of the creek, is a cave with several rooms. The first 15 feet wide and 27 long, all right? A cave with rooms, guys. Listen to this, 4 feet deep. So 15 feet by 27 feet long, 4 feet deep, the upper part of solid and even rock. Into this cave was a passage, which had been so artfully covered that it escaped detection till lately. The hallways were even decorated, artfully covered. You hear this? A flat stone 3 feet wide and 4 feet long rested upon the ground and inclining against the cave enclosed part of the mouth. At the end of this, and on the side of the mouth left open, is another stone rolled, which filling this also closed the whole mouth. When these rocks were removed and the cave opened, all right, you guys hear there was like these big stones that were covering these entries, just like these ancient movies like Indiana Jones, where you move it, this rolling door, and then behind it is like another, room or whatever. So again, when these rocks were removed and the cave opened, on the inside of the cave were found several bones: the jawbone of a child, the arm, bone of a man, the skulls and thigh bones of men. The whole bottom of the cave was covered with flat stones of a bluish hue, being closely joined together, and of different forms and sizes. They formed the floor of the cave. Upon the floor the bones were laid. The hat of Mr. Egbert Shepard, 7 inches wide and 8 inches long, but just covered and slipped over one of the skulls, okay? Big skulls. At the mouth of Obed's River, on the point between it and the Cumberland River, which is high ground, certain persons in digging struck a little below the surface 4 stones standing upright and so placed in relation to each other as to form a square or box, all right? 4 pillars, guys. Listen to this, is what they're finding, which enclosed a skeleton placed on its feet in an erect posture. It was standing up. The skull was large enough to go over the head of a man of common size. They literally put it on like a hat. The thigh bone applied to those of a man of ordinary stature reached from the joint of his hip to the calf of his leg. Literally finding giants here, guys. About 10 miles from Sparta, in White County, a conical mound was lately opened, and in the center of it was found a skeleton 8 feet in length. I mean, we got so many reports of this. We know what they were finding, and we know they were destroying numerous mounds. We got the report of all these destroyed mounds. They weren't even recorded. We didn't even know they were there. This is one of them. They found an 8-foot skeleton in it. With it was found a stone of the flint kind, very hard, with two flat sides, having in the center circular hollows exactly accommodated to the balls of the thumb and forefinger. This stone was an inch and a half in diameter, the form exactly circular. It was about 1/3 of an inch thick and made smooth and flat for rolling, like a grindstone, to the form of which indeed the whole stone was assimilated. When placed upon the floor, it would roll for a considerable time without falling. The whole surface was smooth and well polished, and must have been cut and made smooth by some hard, metallic instrument. No doubt it was buried with the deceased, because for some reason he had set a great value on it in his lifetime, and had excelled in some accomplishment to which it related. The color of the stone was a dingy white inclining to a darkish yellow. At the side of this skeleton were also found two flat stones, about 6 inches long, 2.5 wide at the lower part, and about 1.5 at the upper end, widening in the shape of an axe or hatchet from the upper to the lower end. The thickness of the stone, about 1/10 of an inch below the upper, and exactly equidistant from the lateral edges. A small hole is neatly bored through each stone, so that by a string run through, the stone might be suspended on the side or from the neck as ornament. One of these stones is the common limestone. The other is semi-transparent, so as to be darkened by the hand placed behind it, and resembles in texture those stalactical formations, like white stone, which are made in the bottoms of caves by the dripping of water. When broken, there appears a grain running from one flat side to the other, like the shootings of ice or saltpetre, of a whitish color inclining to yellow. The latter stones are too thin and slender for any operation upon other substances, and must have been purely ornamental. Guys, they're talking about they're finding this stuff with an 8-foot skeleton in this conical mound they destroyed and opened. The first described stone must have been intended for rolling, for why take so much pains to make it circular, if to be used in flinging? Or why, if for the latter purpose so much pains taken to make excavations adapted to the thumb and finger? The conjecture seems to be a probable one, that it was used in some game played upon the same principles as that called nine pins, and the little round balls like marbles, but of larger size, were so disposed as that the rolling stone should pass through them. Such globular stone, it is already stated, was found in a mound in Maury County. With this large skeleton were also found 8 beads and a human tooth. The beads were circular and of a bulbous form, the largest about 1/4 of an inch in diameter, the other smaller, the greater part of them tumescent from the edge to the center, at which a hole was perforated for a string to pass through and to connect them. The inner sides were hard and white, like lime indurated by some chemical process. The outside was a thin coal of black crust, very much resembling Japan. When we reflect that the Scythian nations, all right, Scythian, later known as Saxons or sons of Isaac, Scythian nations between the Danube and the Tonias, as late as within 1 century of the Christian era, were of a size which astonished the southern inhabitants of Europe and Asia, that they scalped their enemy, that they buried their dead in heaps of earth thrown over them. All right, you guys hear that? We've gone over this, that the Scythians, the Saxons, burying the dead in mounds, and they were of great stature. You hear that? It matches with what they're finding here, with such articles as were deemed by the deceased most valuable in his lifetime, and that their tumuli or barrows are yet to be seen in the plains towards the upper part of the Irtysh and Janis, and from the banks of the Volga to the Lake Baikal. We cannot refrain from the conclusion that this skeleton belonged to a human body of the same race. It must be a Saxon. Education and notions with those who lived on the Volga, Tonais, and Obey. The same unknown cause which, in the course of 2,000 years, has reduced the size of the ancient Scythians and their tribes, the Gauls and Germans and Sarmatians, has produced the same effects here. The descendants of these giants, both in the Old and New World, agree with each other in both, as their ancestors did with each other, which proves a uniform cause operating equally both in the old and new world. All right, so touch the hijack, because this is the true old world. The decrease in bulk seems to have kept pace everywhere, with the increase of warm temperature and with the abbreviation of longevity. The giants of Hebron and Gath, and those of Laconia and Italy, whose large skeletons to this day attest there they formerly dwelt, compared with those now found in the West Tennessee, demonstrate that a change of climate or of some other cause has worked a remarkable change in the human system. And with respect to the mammoth, the megalonyx, and other animals, has either extinguished or driven them into other and far distant latitudes. So this author is saying, hey, something happened. I don't know if it was climate change or whatever, but people seem to have gotten shorter, or these tall people ain't around anymore like they were back in the day. Nature, as it grows in age, is less vigorous than at the beginning. In its early age, it was. Its productions correspond with its debility, and the time must come when she, like all her productions, will give up the ghost and work no more. But the principal use we have to make of the skeleton before us is to discover first that he came from a cold or northern climate. I don't know why he thinks that. Why does it have to be a cold or northern climate and not from the south, as the primitive aborigines did? For men of large stature were never found within the tropics. And of course, this is misinformation on his part, because we have found numerous finds of giant skeletons in South America, Central America as well. Secondly, that he must have come from the north of Europe or of Asia. All right, so why? Why is he trying to put the giant coming in from somewhere else? Because of the similarity of customs already remarked. And thirdly, that he probably belonged to those northern tribes, probably, which some centuries ago exterminated the nations which had come from the south and were settled upon the Cumberland and its waters. With this skeleton was found another nearly of the same size, with the top of his head flat and his eyes placed apparently in the upper part of his forehead. So this is a whole other skeleton they're finding here in Tennessee. The Aztecs or Mexicans represent their principal divinities, as their hieroglyphical manuscripts prove, with a head much more flattened than any which have been seen amongst the Caribs, and they never disfigured the heads of their children. But many of the southern tribes have adopted the barbarous custom of pressing the heads of their children between two boards, in imitation, no doubt, of the Mexican or Mexican form, which in their estimation was beautiful or in some way advantageous. And here it may not be amiss to mention that the Chileans, who lived as far to the south of the equator as formerly did the Scythians, Goths, and Vandals, Gauls, and Germans, so remarkable in ancient times for their stature, did on the other side of it, were men of large stature. One remark may be of some use in the drawing of inferences from the preceding facts. The skeletons we find are entire under conical mounds, or in part consumed by fire, and under such mounds or entire in shallow graves, with the flat rocks placed on the edges, at the sides, and at the head and feet, or are entire above the common surface, and in the conical mounds enclosed in rocks placed together in the form of a box, or stand erect in such boxes with the head some depth below the surface. To burn and cover with a mound is Hindoic aggression and belonging to the ancient countries of Asia Minor. He's saying only those people do it, but we did that here. You find numerous mounds here, guys. Come on, this is mound country or mound cities right here, America. You guys know that. All kinds of different mounds. So it's not just found in the cultures of the Hindoic aggression people of Asia Minor. And probably belonged to the Aborigines of America. Of course it did, properly so called. To cover the entire body is Scythic. Oh, it's Saxon. Oh, it's something the sons of Isaac do. Oh, okay. To bury in graves or in boxes is Ethiopic. Oh, the Western Ethiopians. Remember the two Ethiopias? You mean people of dark complexion? Egyptian? Oh, to bury in boxes, Egyptian. Yeah, well, this is Egypt. This is the true ancient Egypt. That's why. And in part, this is also Hebraic. all right? So this is the true old world. This is what they're finding here, guys. These customs, the way they're burying the dead, what they're finding here in the mounds, these giant skeletons, the way they're buried, the pebbles and everything resembles, as these people are saying, these old world cultures, the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, and the Hebrews. The Hebrews haven't learned it during their residence in Egypt, though they did not generally adopt it. It may be concluded that the mounds over entire bodies are Scythic, graves and boxes, Hebraic, and boxes in the mounds, Hebraic and Scythic, and of course, that the unconsumed skeletons we see here are either pure Scythians or Hebrew Scythians. Guys, come on, man. What is a Scythian? Later known as the Saxons or the sons of Isaac. We already got the drop. Look how they're comparing it here, Scythians or Hebrew Scythians. Who are they finding in the mounds? These large bones, he's saying, are the sons of Isaac, according to this author, huh? Whilst all others are Hindoic, or in other words, Aboriginal. So Hinduic means Aboriginal? Uh-oh. The large men of the world have always been found in the north, and they have often invaded and broken up the people of the south. They have never been found in the south, nor have the people of the south ever broken up their settlements there. All right, again, they have found giant skeletons in South America and Central America, and marched upon those of the north to expel them from their possessions to make room for themselves. Of course, there's been wars between people coming from the south. The men who deposited the skeletons we are now contemplating were of northern growth, and they came to the south to drive away the inhabitants whom they found there and to seat themselves in their possessions. All right. This is what they're saying. They came, it must be Europeans that came from this, literally trying to say is Vikings, Scythian, eventually Saxon became Vikings who eventually came here, right? But maybe they're seeing it in reverse. This is the true Holy Land. Who are the sons of Isaac? So what happened to these bones? Why did they never tell us about these findings? And as you guys can see here, this is what happened to these bones. We're going to read from the Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge, Volume 22. So you guys already know what the Smithsonian does. They like to hide everything. So yeah, they got a hold of these findings, of course. And we're going to get a report coming out of this journal. It's called Explorations of the Aboriginal Remains of Tennessee by Joseph Jones, MD, Professor of Chemistry and Clinical Medicine in the Medical Department of the University of Louisiana, New Orleans. This is from 1876. So real quick, I'm going to read from chapter 1. It says here, burial caves. By the first settlers of Tennessee, many of the caves which abound in the limestone formation were found to contain human bones in abundance, which had been deposited by the race formerly inhabiting this country. Now, all this limestone talk just makes me think of the research of Paul Cook. Is it really geopolymer we're talking about? And these people were actually buried inside a building. Just a thought here. So all these caves with limestones were found again to contain human bones in abundance, which had been deposited by the race formerly inhabiting this country. The working of these caves for nitrate during the Revolutionary War, the Indian War, the last war with Great Britain, and the recent Civil War of 1861-1865 has resulted in the removal and destruction of these human remains, okay? Destruction, they destroyed all this stuff, guys. I have visited several caves which are known to have contained human bones in former times, without obtaining any of these ancient relics. As far as my observations extended, the caves containing the human remains were always located in the vicinity of fertile valleys, all right? Rich black soil, we're talking about Kemet, rich fertile black soil, fertile valleys, and plains in the neighborhood of some river or never failing spring of water. Large mounds were generally found in the same localities, and the condition of the former inhabitants was evinced by the numerous fragments of pottery, arrowheads, and other stone implements. Numerous stone graves containing human remains are, at the present day, found along the banks of the rivers and streams in the fertile valleys and around the cool springs which abound in the limestone region of Tennessee and Kentucky. All right, again, numerous stone graves, guys. It's massive. These ancient repositories of the dead are frequently surrounded by extensive earthworks, which enclose imposing monumental remains. In these remains, we have proof that this country, in common with other portions of the Great Valley of the Mississippi, was inhabited in ancient times by a comparatively dense population, which subsisted on the products of husbandry, as well as by the chase, all right? A dense population, advanced civilization here in the Great Valley of the Mississippi. Do you remember? It is important in the first place to examine the testimony of the earlier explorers and writers upon the deposits of human bones in caves. The early pioneers and hunters discovered everywhere in the more fertile regions, again, fertile, of Middle Tennessee, marks of the ancient inhabitants, and they described the caves which they visited at that time as full of human bones. Full of human bones, guys. Haywood relates that in the spring of the year 1811, the remains of two human beings were found in a Corporous cave in Warren County in West Tennessee, about 15 miles southwest from Sparta and 20 miles from McMinnville. One of them was a male, the other a female. They were interred in baskets made of cane curiously wrought and evidence and considerable mechanical skill. They were both dislocated at the hip joint and were placed erect in the baskets with a covering of cane made to fit the enclosure in which they were placed. The flesh of their bodies was undecayed, of a brown color, okay? Their skin was of a brown color, not pale skin, brown color, and adherent to the bones and sinews. Around the female next to the body was wrapped a well-dressed doeskin. Next to this was a mat, very curiously wrought from the bark of a tree and feathers. The bark seemed to have been made into small strands, well twisted. Around each of these strands, feathers were rolled, and the whole was woven into cloth of a fine texture, after the manner of our common coarse fabrics. This mat was about 3 feet wide and between 6 and 7 feet in length, okay? This is what they're being buried with. The whole of the fabric thus formed of bark was completely covered by the feathers, the body of it being about 1/8 of an inch in thickness, and the feathers extending about 1/4 of an inch from the strand to which they were attached. The appearance was highly diversified by green, yellow, and black feathers. All right, so the article keeps talking about many different cases of skeletons and caves being found in this area, pyramids, mounds, how they're being wrapped, what they're being found with. Wanted to show this example right here. It says on the north bank of the Holston, 5 miles above the mouth of the French Broad, are 6 mounds within half an acre of ground, placed without any apparent regularity. They are in form truncated pyramids. The bases are from 10 to 30 feet in diameter. The largest of them are 10 feet in height. Their form is remarkably regular. In one of them, which was cut into perpendicularly, a small quantity of charcoal and ashes was discovered. These mounds are enclosed by an old ditch, which can at this time be traced distinctly on the sides, and which encloses several acres of land besides the mounds. At every angle of the ditch is a bastion in the form of a semicircle. On the south bank opposite the mound is a bluff of limestone, in which is a cave. This bluff is 100 feet in height. On it are faintly painted in red colors. Listen to this. This is actual art on the walls here in the cave. The sun and moon, so this is painted. The sun and moon, a man, birds, fishes, etc. These figures have in part faded within a few years. Tradition says they were made by the Cherokees. All right, definitely not by the Cherokees, the hijack, who were accustomed in their journeys to rest at this place. Whether such a tradition is entitled to credit is for the judicious reader to determine, all right? So it's for us to see if that's true. Definitely not true. Cherokees are newcomers to the area. And what is a Cherokee? All right, so check out the previous presentations. We're still going over the genealogy, all right? The latter frequently contain the skulls of human beings alleged to have been sacrificed by fire on the mounds. The paintings are supposed to have represented the deities whom the people worshipped, and the ditches may possibly had pointed out the consecrated ground. All right, so this is the part where they add in their conjecture, which was not to be polluted by the threat of unhallowed feet. The large container says here a human body was found in the year 1815 in one of the limestone caverns of Kentucky. The skin bones and other firm parts were in a state of entire preservation. The outer envelope of the body was a deerskin dressed in a usual way and perhaps subsequently softened by rubbing before being used. The next covering was a deerskin, the hair of which had been cut away by a sharp instrument. The remnants of the hair and the gashes in the skin nearly resembled the sheared felt of beaver. The next wrapping was cloth, made of twine, doubled and twisted. The innermost wrapping was a mantle of cloth like the preceding, but finished with large brown feathers, arranged and fastened with great skill, so as to be capable of guarding the living wearer from wet and cold. The plumage was distinct and entire, and the whole bore a near similitude to the feather cloaks now worn by the natives of the northwest coast of America. The body was in a squatting posture, with the right arm bent forward, and its hand encircling the right leg. The left arm hung down, with its hand extended partly under the body. The individual, who was a male, did not probably exceed the age of 14 at his death. There was a deep and extensive fracture of the skull near the occiput, which was probably the cause of his death. The skin had sustained little injury. It was of a dusky color. All right, his complexion was of a dusky color, dark color, but the natural hue could not be decided with exactness from its appearance at that time. The scalp, with small exceptions, was covered with sorrel and foxy hair. The teeth were white and sound. The hands and feet seemed to have been slender and delicate. Some are inclined to the opinion that this specimen belonged to the Peruvian race. All right, they're saying it resembles the Peruvian race. Maybe they're mummies. But you guys see how these mummies are being wrapped when they're saying they're finding these skeleton bones in these other books and not explaining the detail of how they're being, preserved and mummified. He goes on to say the light color of the hair and these so-called mummies of Tennessee and Kentucky was most probably due to the action of the lime and the saltpetre. All right, so he's saying the hair is yellow or red because of a chemical reaction and the age of it being buried there, not because they actually had that color hair. Something we're going to actually explore further. It's not the only person that I've read saying it. Still, we just pull out the babies out of these and we dodge the hijack. Continuing, something very interesting here. It says when Kentucky was first explored, great numbers of human bodies are said to have been found in a state of preservation in a cave near Lexington. As the pioneers did not appear to attach much importance to the antiquities, these bodies were not preserved. The bodies found in the Saltpetre Cave of Kentucky are said to have been considerably smaller than the men of our times. All right, they found little people here, smaller than the men of our times, than regular humans of the author's time. And their teeth are described as long, white, and sharp, with sharp teeth, and separated by considerable intervals. Yeah, we do know of tribal people sharpening their teeth. That doesn't mean anything due to monsters, but hey, you never know. We're talking about fairies here, elves, real elves. Gotta have an open mind with all this. Mr. Caleb Atwater quotes Mr. Clifford of Lexington, Kentucky, to the effect that the mummies were generally found enveloped in three coverings. The first, a species of coarse linen, cloth about the consistency and texture of cotton baggins. The second kind of network of coarse threads formed of very small, loose meshes in which were fixed the feathers of various kinds of birds, lying all in one direction, so as to make a perfectly smooth surface. The third, an outer envelope, either like the first or consisting of skins sewed together. All right, so another detailed description of how these people are buried. So just to continue here a bit, I just want to show some examples of what they're saying, corroborating what they're finding here in Tennessee when it comes to giants. We got the actual Smithsonian, right, writing here a report, one of their archaeologists talking about the size of some of these bones. They admitting to have found giants here. They're going to be quoting some people here, primary sources. It says here the writer was in company with Dr. C.R. Chowning near his residence many years ago and found a considerable quantity of human bones in a tolerable state of preservation. It is remembered that we found thigh and leg bones, and crania. Upon measurement, the thigh and leg bones were uniformly larger than the bones of the present race of man. All right, larger. We're talking about giants, larger. The locality of the bones was not like the usual burial places. We suppose, therefore, that anciently a battle may have been fought there, and the bones of the slain may have been thus deposited. We remarked nothing very peculiar in the size of the crania found. Dr. Zechariah R. Chaunin lives 13 miles northwest of Livingston. This is all the information we can now give you. All right, so I just want to show you guys that even talking about, yeah, they found, bones of giants. The natural and aboriginal history of Tennessee up to the first settlements therein by the white people in the year 1768. And this is from 1823. So now we're going to go into section 2. This is going to get interesting as well. It says here, of their pygmies. Okay, so not only did we have giants, but they're finding pygmies here buried in Tennessee. We've gone over a newspaper article. I'm going to show you guys already before. So this is just more corroboration here. It says here, certain small tombs and skeletons in them having been discovered a few miles from Sparta in the county of White, and a publication having been made concerning them in the Nashville Whig of June 1820. Mr. Lane, from whom the information first came, was written to. All his feelings were alive, and all his exertions were roused. The result was a communication, some time afterwards, from him carefully reduced to writing, which with the materials referred to were submitted to the examination of medical gentlemen of Nashville. The written communication from Mr. Lane was dated on the 26th of July, 1820, and stated that he had undertaken to make some further discoveries amongst the little tombs, which seemed to be peculiar to the settlement in which he lived, a few miles from Sparta. He found in one of the small graves, the package number 1, the fractured part of a skeleton. The grave, as usual, was about 2 feet in length and 14 inches broad, okay? And 16 inches deep from the covering rock to the bottom, as nearly as could be ascertained, for the bottom of these graves is never covered with rock. The skull of this being, he said, was much larger than any he had before seen in these graves, but from the length of the thigh and arm bones may be conjectured the height. He also sent the teeth to the end that it might be decided whether they were canine, monkey, or human. The skull, though fractured, in his opinion, retained enough of its original form to determine to what class of beings it once belonged. All right, because they're so small, right? They're trying to see if this is a monkey, is this like a dog, wolf, or something? What is this? They're trying to make sure. The body to which the skull belonged seemed not to have been interred in the usual form, but to have been set up in the grave with his back against the head rock of the tomb. The skull was found uppermost, and directly beneath it the ribs, but these were so decayed that they crumbled with the slightest touch, and could not be preserved. Next were the arms and thigh bones lying beside each other, with their upper ends near the head rock, and the skull directly on the upper end of these bones. Hence it is supposed the body was not prostrate. With this personage were found some other singularities, 3 vessels and 2 conch shells, when one of each set is customary in these small graves. The size and figure of the furniture is noticeable, namely, a vessel that, from what of it remains, appears to have holden a quantity between 1 and 2 quarts, whilst the other graves have a vessel holden about 1 pint. This large vessel also being carved and laced, whilst the others have their vessels entirely plain, is in this respect singular. The basin, though otherwise plain, is laced round the rim. The other vessel is so broken down that no observations can be made on it. Further than this, that from the strength which seems attached to the bottom, it must have been intended for drudgery. These vessels were found in the following order: the large carved pot on the right, and the strong bottom vessel and 2 cornets on the left. These things considered, the size of the head, the unusual largeness of the grave, the number, quantity, and size of the vessels, and the number of shells, they being mussel instead of conch shells, the vessels being placed on the right and left, and the body being set erect. All indicated a difference between the person to whom this skeleton belonged and ordinary ones. On Saturday, the 29th of July, 1820, Mr. Lane went to Captain Simon Doyle's, the place where Mr. Anderson formerly lived, to search there for further discoveries. He and those who were with him opened two small graves. The first, 18 inches long, okay? That was the size of this grave, okay? About 12 inches broad. It contained little bones, pieces of part of one tooth, and other things contained in package number two. The second grave was 2 feet long, 13 inches wide, and 15 inches deep. It contained the bones, teeth, vessel, and shells enclosed in package number three. This person was laid upon the right side, with his head to the south and his face to the east. The body lay north and south, and the thigh bones east and west. The legs were then laid back so as to form an angle, with the thighs of about 30 degrees. All this could be clearly ascertained by cautious and careful examination of the bones, which, although plainly to be seen, yet nevertheless were so decayed that they would crumble at the slightest touch. All right, these must be really, really old pygmy people. Nor could they possibly lift the bones in any sounder condition than as they were presented to view in the package. The underside of the skull, as it was in the grave, was sounder and stronger than that which was uppermost. The skull which was in the grave last opened could not possibly be raised, for the graves were all full of dirt, as closely bound together as any other ground outside the grave. And when the skull is discovered, the probability is that a hole will break into it on the upper part. The concave is perfectly hollow, but the earth could not be removed from about it without crumbling it down as fast as the earth was removed. The concave diameter, Mr. Lane measured, it was about 5 inches. Some small scraps of it, number three, he sent. The socket of the eye was perceptible. The nettings of the head were visible. The chin, the size and strength of the teeth, and the size and curvature of the ribs were all apparent. The graves lie promiscuously through the farm of Mr. Lane. All right, guys, a lot of different graves here of these little people. But at Mr. Anderson's, where Captain Doyle now lives, there's a large and closely connected burying ground, all of the description already given. And there are others of the same description 4 miles south of Sparta, all right? All these graves of little people. Mr. Anderson formerly opened many of them. Captain Doyle, the present owner, has opened several of them, and they both say they believe hundreds might be found there. There is no discernible rising on the surface of the earth by reason of these graves, but they are found by striking an iron tool into the ground so deep as to strike the covering rock. This rock being then removed, the grave can be easily discovered by the edges of the side and end rocks. On Tuesday, the 1st of August, 1820, Mr. Lane and company, with his sons Jacob A. Lane, Esquire, made further searches in the burying ground at Captain Doyle's, formerly Mr. Anderson's. They opened another small grave, just 22 inches long, another one, little guy, made after the usual form, and took out of it the bones and little trinkets in package number four. This skeleton lay on its back, with its feet drawn up so as to raise the knees about 4 inches above the bottom of the grave. The head was raised above the bottom of the grave also, so as to cause the chin to lie on the breast. They measured the skeleton carefully as it lay in the grave and found it to be from a little below the ankle joints to the top of the skull, 2 feet 10 inches. All right, that was the size of this person. He was 2 feet 10 inches, a little guy. All right, taking care to measure the limbs as they meandered and making sufficient allowance for she reclining of the head at any rate. It was not above 3 feet high. Its head was to the east, the face to the west. This grave was 4 feet from the one last mentioned. The little round shelf found in this grave with two little holes, a cross and two circles, a cross and two circles cut in it, is what was not seen in any other grave they had opened. That is to say, the cross and circles were not. 3 vessels were in the grave. but all broken down so that they were not worth preserving. 5 feet from the grave, just opened, they opened another. It was large, constructed after the manner of a coffin, the head 14 inches broad, the elbows 22 inches, and the foot 10 inches. The sides and ends were lined with flag rock, after the manner of the small graves, but not quite so deep, it being only 12 inches. In the grave lay a person 5 feet 5 inches high, the head to the west and the feet to the east. They uncovered the bones of this skeleton from head to foot without moving any bone until they had a full view of the entire skeleton. It was not shrouded, for its mouth was extended wide open and was full of teeth. The arms lay along the sides, the ribs were broad and flat, and more than double the size of those of the pygmies. The head was longer, the eyes much wider asunder, the forehead much higher above the eyebrows, and the underjaw measured just 1 inch longer at each side than the little one sent to Nashville. All right, so they found an actual person that was 5'5", but they're saying these were like double the size of the little guys. They laid them together and ascertained the exact difference. The collarbone, the arm, thigh, and leg bones of this being appeared strong, beyond what they expected from the size of human bones. The elbows, knee, and ankle joints were much larger than was expected. After they had measured it and satisfied themselves of its true position, they raised many of the bones, particularly the head, all the limbs, some few joints on the backbone, some ribs, and the broad flat bones at the bottom of the lower chest. The skull had not a fracture, except the top of the right cheek bone, which they undesignedly struck off. The limbs were all lying in their proper posture, with joint to its joint, and bone to its socket. When they raised the skull, a great number of hairs were found sticking to it, which seemed to be the hairs of the head of the person interred. They were fine and straight and of a bright silver gray. These bones they laid back in the grave, covered them with the former coverings, rocks, and then with earth. No vessels or trinkets were found with this skeleton, and from the great dissimilarity in the shape of their heads, the size and make of their ribs, the great disproportion between the size of the joints and the bones of their limbs, they seemed to belong to very different tribes of people. The heads of the pygmies appeared larger upon inspection than they had supposed them to be, and upon finding the bones in package number 1, no person in the neighborhood who had formerly seen the little graves opened could believe that this was of the same kind, owing to its size, but in that they must have been mistaken, for the graves are the same in every particular, though when measured they seem to be a few inches longer in length and breadth than was at first imagined, for it had been 5 or 6 years since they had seen any of them, nor could they have yet believed otherwise, had they not searched out new ones and reduced them to actual measurement. They have attended to a circumstance now which before had not been thought of, namely, that the body, as laid in the grave with its limbs, particularly the legs and thighs, were laid crooked, so as to reduce the length, and being a person of 2 feet 10 inches high, or perhaps as high as 3 feet, into a grave of 2 feet long, but continues, Mr. Lane, from the great number of graves of this description and size, which we found here, and amongst them all, but one of a larger size. It seems to be intimated that there have been a race of people here in ancient times whose height was from 2 feet 10 inches to 3 feet. Okay, we're talking about in ancient America, they're finding this in Tennessee. This is what they're letting you know. They were trying to figure out why they're finding these little graves, what appears these little bones of 2 feet 10 inches. Maybe it's because the way they were arranged, but no, they're letting you know. It seems that there were in ancient times people here whose height was from 2 feet to 10 inches to 3 feet, and that they have addicted themselves to strong superstitions is indubitable. All right, that's undeniable. They're part of the myth. It's what he's saying. As ancient as the hair of the large skeleton seemed to be, there was not a tooth lost or unsound in the whole head. But the pygmy head in number 4 has in the upper jaw a decayed tooth, whence it is conjectured that the person to whom this skeleton belonged was elder than the other. Mr. Lane sent also for examination a small package, number 5. This contained 24 small conch shells and 2 other small shells, like a taper screw. In the small package are the small pieces of old pots picked up above ground at the old town of Mr. Wilson's. It remained sound after lying above ground, perhaps for several hundred years. The small conch in this package were found about 4 miles southwesterly from Sparta and about 8 miles west of Mr. Lane's farm, near where the large skeletons were found, of 7 feet in length or upwards, which have been already mentioned. They were there shown a little mound on the margin of one of their old towns, which was literally covered with them. They got a hole and dug into it, and found that the shells lay mixed with the earth, about 4 feet deep, but none that they could find deeper. Amongst them were many of the taper shells, terebratula. They also found just below the surface some old, decayed bones, which they believed to be human, and some pieces of fire coal. A quantity of those a quantity of those shells to the amount of half a bushel might be gotten at this place. Package number 6 was also sent by Mr. Lane, in which is a small stone. This and many others of the same shape are found about the old towns. Some of them are of a bluish color, some green, some black. They are of different sizes, but all appear to be of the same species or quality of rock, of which it is said there are none such which are the natural production of the country. So this is coming from far away, the things they're finding buried with these people. These packages and their contents were submitted to the gentlemen of the medical faculty at Nashville, and they examined them. Various opinions were entertained upon the maturity or infancy of the small skeletons. The prevailing opinion seemed to be that these skeletons belonged to adult persons, okay? They weren't children. One gentleman agreed that one of the small skulls belonged to an adult, but thought that the size of the body could not be judged off from the cranium, but that the cylindrical bones in number one and the tooth belonged to some animal of the canine species. Another believed, so the fact seems now to be taken, that the bones and tooth in number one belonged to some carnivorous animal of the canine genus, but that the skull belonged to an adult person of small size, not much exceeding 3 feet in length. Another has given the same opinion upon inspection of the bones. All right, so they're all saying, hey, the bones, the skull is definitely an adult, 3 feet or under. The small conch shells, 2 dozen in number, might be accounted for by reference to the Hindu customs, were it not for the neighborhood of the large skeletons which forbid the idea of emigration from the south. They were found in a small mound on the margin of an old town, which mound was covered with them, and they were intermixed with the clay to the depth of 4 feet below the surface. One of them was placed in the water vessel of the capacity of a pint, which was placed at the head of each pygmy skeleton. Had they not been deemed very sacred, the inhabitants of the town would have gradually removed them from the mound, for at least they were curiosities, not being of the growth of the country, and having been brought from the ocean at least 500 or 600 miles, if they did not come from the northeastern shores of America. Yet they were left undisturbed so long as the people remained who placed them in the crust of the mound. Beneath them were human bones, perhaps of some distinguished priest of Vishnu. And perhaps, yeah, you guys hear that? And perhaps each grave in which was one of these skeletons contained the bones of a worshipper of Vishnu. In ancient times, the worshippers of the sun from the confines of China and Tibet emigrated to Sarmatia, and thence to Germany, and thence to Finland and the countries of the Samoyeds, which so much resemble the Eskimos. And these latter also were worshippers of the sun, as well as the Greenlanders. From the country of their primitive emigration, the Eskimos may have brought with them to America, through many other ages and people, this branch of the most ancient religion of India and of the East. No, okay, so this part we're gonna touch the Haja. We already know America's a true world. We're talking about India, Hindustan. Who are the Nagas? We went over there. He's seen it in reverse. He's saying maybe the Eskimos brought all this over here. Maybe. No. With respect to those small conch shells found buried with the small skeletons, which conch are about the size of pullet eggs, we may conjecture with some degrees of certainty that these are relics of Hindu superstition, which came immediately or immediately from India, where it originated. But as it is admitted on all hands that these skeletons belong to human beings, though some bones and teeth of the canine species are intermixed, we shall be at a loss to conjecture where in times of antiquity lived this diminutive race of human beings. That such a race of men once existed, we're talking about pygmies, real pygmies here, guys, in America, is asserted by Homer and Herodotus, the most ancient profane writers that we know of, but the assertion has never received credit. They were mentioned also by Pliny, Strabo, and Mela as existing in India. This is India, guys, you get it? India superior the whole time. America, North America is India superior, as well as in Ethiopia. Well, this is the other Ethiopia, or where the Ethiopians, the Western Ethiopians dwell, where Herodotus states them to have been. Remember, he said there was the Western and Eastern Ethiopians slash Atlanteans. But Jovius says that they are found in the extremities of the northern regions, referring no doubt to the Samiotes of Lapland and those to the north of them. The best opinion advanced upon the subject seems to be that some of the northeastern inhabitants of America came in the train of the Scythians or Tartars. All right. So again, seen in reverse, they're trying to say, how did these little pygmies get here? Why do pygmies have to be from somewhere else? America's a true old world. Of the stones found about the old towns in White County, some of a bluish color, some greenish, and some black, and all, as it is supposed, foreign to the country, were found. It shall suffice to mention that a stone about 6 inches long, half an inch thick, 3 inches wide, and still widening to the edge, and having an edge like an axe, was found in an old fortification in White County, 5 or 6 miles from Sparta. It seemed tinged on the edge and sides with blood which had been petrified on a part of the axe. The color of green was intermixed with a few spots of lighter complexion. It is very hard and smooth. Stone axes of exactly the same description are brought from the Fiji or Friendly Islands in the Pacific by navigators. The same species of stone is found on the banks of the Amazon. From the former of which places came also the art of making the feathered mantles before spoken. All right, so all right, a connection here with the Amazon, High Brazil, and the Pacific Islanders. All right, so that's the parts here about the giants and the pygmies they found here. Remember what we were reading, guys? The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee by John Haywood, 1823. It's called Explorations of the Aboriginal Remains of Tennessee by Joseph Jones, MD. This is from 1876. And we're going to go to chapter 2 of this book. It says here, modes of burial practiced by the Aborigines of America. Stone graves. The ancient race of Tennessee buried their dead in rude stone coffins or cists constructed of flat pieces of limestone or slaty sandstone which abound in Middle Tennessee. Extensive graveyards in which the stone coffins lie close to each other are found in Tennessee and Kentucky along the river courses in the valleys and around the springs. A considerable portion of the city of Nashville has been built over an extensive Indian graveyard. All right, Nashville, Tennessee, extensive Indian graveyard which lay along the valley of Lake Branch. A large number of these graves have been destroyed in the building of North Nashville. In this section of the city, I saw a number of them quite exposed during the digging of the cellars of a row of houses, and obtained from them a small stone hatchet and another implement of hard silicious material, beautifully polished. This stone implement is supposed to have been used in the dressing of hides. All around the sulphur spring, traces of the Aborigines are manifest in the form of fragments of large pots and various stone implements. It is supposed that the Salt Lake was frequented by the Aborigines for the purpose of killing the buffalo and deer which resorted there, and also for the manufacture of salt. A graveyard is located on the same bank of the Cumberland River, about a mile and a half lower down. Another at Cockrell Spring, 2.5 miles from the Sulphur Spring. Another 6 miles from Nashville, on the Charlotte Turnpike. Another about 8 miles above, near the mouth of Stones River, and still another at Haysboro. I opened a number of stone graves on the farm of Colonel W. D. Gale, about 3 miles from Nashville. At the foot of the hill upon which the residence is situated flows a never failing spring. The Indians used the hill above the spring as a burying ground. I exhumed from one grave a small black idol, from another copper ornaments. and from other graves upon the same hill, vases of various forms. Many other localities might be enumerated in the immediate vicinity of Nashville. Numerous stone graves are also found on White's Creek on the Dickinson Turnpike, 9 miles from Nashville. All right, so again, numerous graves all over the place. Extensive Indian burial grounds are also found in White County. All right, this is what we were just reading, near Sparta and along the various streams flowing into the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers, as Harpeth, Duck, Elk, and Stone rivers. At the plantation of General de Graffenried, 2.5 miles from Franklin, numerous stone graves are found within and around an extensive earthwork, all right, a mound, which appears to have surrounded a considerable Indian town. One large mound, pyramidal in shape and 230 feet in diameter, together with a chain of small conical mounds, is found within the ancient fortification. Several of the smaller mounds contain numerous stone graves. Some are also scattered about at the base of several of the larger mounds. An extensive burying ground is also situated on the slope of the hill overlooking the mounds and earthwork. One of the most extensive and remarkable collections of stone graves is on the west fork of Big Harpeth, 6.5 miles from Franklin, at a place called Old Town, the property of Mr. Thomas Brown. Extensive graveyards are also found at various localities along the banks at the Harpeth River down to its junction with the Cumberland. All right, you guys hear this? All these graves here. These graves, although justly considered as rude fabrics, nevertheless exhibit considerable skill in their construction and are standing memorials of the regard in which this ancient race held the memory of the dead. The manner of burial seems to have been as follows. An excavation of a size agreeing with that of the body of the dead was made in the ground, and the bottom carefully paved with flat stones. Flat stones or slabs of limestone and salty sandstone were placed along the sides and at the head and foot of the grave. All right, so this is exactly what they told us in the last reading. You know, all these stones, flat stones, the way they're being placed, of the skeletons, of these small skeletons that we're finding, right? So this is the same thing. So we got the seashells already, we got the idols as warlike implements, stone hatchets and chisels, spearheads, arrowheads, stone swords, paint bowls, and even copper ornaments. The top of the grave was then covered with one or more flat stones, right? This is what the guy was saying. That's a Hindu tradition. It must have been Hindus that came here. Continuing, little Herder says in some localities, the sides of the tombs stood up above the surface from 4 to 8 inches, as in the case of the stone graves described by Bartram. When a number of coffins were placed together, the side stones of the first frequently constituted the side of the second, and so on. Many of the stone graves, listen to this, guys, are quite small and capable of containing only the body of a newborn infant. These small graves were constructed with great care, and the sides, bottom, and top were formed of much thinner and smoother slabs than the graves of the adults. Many of the short, square graves, not more than 18 inches or 2 feet in length, contain the bones of adults piled together, the crania being surrounded by or resting upon the arm and leg bones. This class of graves, containing the bones of adults packed in small space, were probably constructed at the general burying festival, or contained the remains of the dead which had been transported from a distance. This view is sustained by the fact that in some of these graves I have found portions of 2 or more skeletons, sometimes 2 crania, and in others only a portion of a single skeleton. Now listen to this, guys. This is the Smithsonian, right? Report. It has been frequently asserted that the smaller graves contain the bones of small adults or pygmies. It has been further asserted that the entire cemeteries were composed of these small graves, okay? The entire cemetery, all these burying grounds, all this extensive burial grounds are full of pygmies, guys. Pygmies, people that are less than 3 feet tall, 2 feet 10 inches. Pygmies. They're finding here in Tennessee numerous, numerous. Here they go on to quote the book we just read from. He says here in a note added to this description, Haywood record the fact that in the neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri, small stone graves exist, as in Tennessee, and that in certain ancient mounds near Lake Erie, skeletons of people of small stature are found as well, all right? And that's on this page 360, 361 that we just came from.
A Pygmy graveyard in Tennessee, 1876. 6 acres in the graveyard, buried sitting or standing. A dwarf race of people, about 3 feet high, estimated 75,000 to 100,000 buried there. Again, you hear this, guys? What pygmy people who are 3 to 4 feet high? How many are buried there? 75 to 100,000. This things they never told us. Let's read this report. It says an ancient graveyard of vast proportions hath been found in Coffee County. It is similar to those found in White County and other places in Tennessee, but it is vastly more extensive and shows that the race of pygmies who once inhabited this country were very numerous. All right? The same peculiarities of position observed in the White County graves are found in these. The writer of the letter says some considerable excitement and curiosity took place a few days since near Hillsborough, Coffee County, or James Brown's farm. A man was plowing in a field which has been cultivated many years, plowing up a man's skull and other bones. After making a further examination, they found that there were about 6 acres in the graveyard. They were buried in a sitting or standing position. Their bones show that they were a dwarf race of people, about 3 feet high. It is estimated that there were about 75,000 to 100,000 buried there. All right, pygmies and Tennessee. Pygmies are not just from Africa or the Bushmen from Africa. You gotta dodge the hijack. But great report here, as you guys can see. This was reported in a newspaper, 1876.
All right, and for the dismount right here, we go straight to the New York Times time machine. We're going to read an article from Friday, March 24th, 1876. It says here, Tennessee Pygmies. Prehistoric America must have been an exceedingly curious and interesting country. Its forests were filled with mastodons, megatheriums, and other large, lively beasts, any one of which thought nothing of scratching himself on the sharp pinnacles of convenient Gothic church, and so toppling it over on its scores of helpless new pew holders. In the Mississippi Valley, the industrious mound builders were constantly throwing up gigantic molehills and planting them with earthen pots and copper hatchets in the vain expectation that the seed thus sown would yield enormous crops of kitchenware and carpenter's tools. In Kentucky, the giants to whom the bones recently discovered, all right, giant bones in a Kentucky cave, are said to have strode loftily along the turnpikes, kicking the Indians and the mound builders contemptuously out of the way. And finally, in Tennessee, a race of pygmies was continually holding political meetings and resolving that mastodons, mound builders, and giants should be promptly abolished, and that the size of the inhabitants of this country should be made and kept commensurate with its commercial necessities. It is rather odd that the existence of the Tennessee Pygmies of prehistoric America was until recently never suspected. Right? The New York Times, guys, is telling you, hey, man, how come you guys didn't know about this? The name of the mastodon has long been familiar to every person who is in the least degree addicted to fossils. His remains in the shape of a plaster of Paris skeleton with the artist's name stamped in forehead are exhibited in every respectable museum, and inspired the youth of America with bitter regret that the animal so beautifully adapted for experiments with red pepper lozenges has gone where the small boy ceases to trouble and the nomadic circus is at rest. The mound builders have been the subject of scores of learned essays in which their identity with the Aztecs, the Chinese, the Egyptians, the Welsh, and the lost tribes of Israel has been triumphantly shown. All right, it has been what? It has been triumphantly shown, it has been proven, and of the exact height and probable capacity for whiskey of the Kentucky Giants, we have had careful and presumably accurate statistics. The discovery of the Pygmies is, however, so very recent that no one has as yet framed any theory whatever to account for their origin and to explain their complete extinction. When the Kentucky Giants were discovered, it was natural that the state pride of the people of Tennessee should be somewhat hurt. The Tennesseans, however, did not sit down and content themselves with reviling the Kentuckians and insinuating doubts as to the alleged character of the gigantic bones. They promptly proceeded to find rival bones of still greater merit, and their industry has been rewarded by their discovery of a graveyard containing the skeletons of 75,000 Pygmies of the average height of 3 feet each. What are the 3 8-foot giants of Kentucky in comparison with so great a cloud of Pygmies? If we may judge from the price usually paid by circus managers for living giants and dwarfs, a 3-foot dwarf is decidedly more valuable than an 8-foot giant. And if the same standard governs the price of fossils, the 75,000 Tennessee Pygmies are worth fully 25,000 times as much as the 3 Kentucky giants. While the Kentuckians can present their giant to 3 eminent scientific men and thus obtain 3 distinct scientific reports certifying to the enormous interest and value of the fossil giants, the Tennesseans can supply every scientific man in this country and in Europe with a fossil dwarf, and so secure testimonials without number to the unequaled excellence of Tennessee Pygmies. Indeed, if the discoverers of the Pygmies will only employ some astute piano maker who is an expert in testimonials to obtain for the fossil dwarfs the recognition of the scientific world, there is not a living scientific person who will not sign a certificate setting forth his admiration for the beauty and durability of the Pygmies, and his determination to use none but those of the celebrated Tennessee graveyard for the rest of his professional life. At what period these Pygmies flourished, what they accomplished, and by what means they were induced to retire simultaneously to their graveyard can only be conjectured. They may have been the identical Pygmies that, according to the Greek legend, waged war with the Cranes. Alright guys, it might be the ones from the Greek legends. If so, the Cranes must have proved too powerful for them. This is hardly probable, and any modern Tennessean who has attempted to keep chickens in the neighborhood of a family of citizens of African descent, dodged the hijack, will scornfully refuse to believe that Pygmies of 3 feet in height could not kill cranes on their roosts with at least as much success as is achieved by the African small boy when invading the midnight hen house. All right, I don't know where they're going with this, but let's touch the hijack. We must wait for further discoveries before it will be safe to decide whether the Pygmies were contemporary with the giants and whether they preceded the mound builders. The bare fact that they once existed is all that we can now safely affirm of them. They did exist, but doubtless by the time that every home in the country is ornamented by a fossil Pygmy and every newspaper publishes extracts from the certificates of scientific persons who are overwhelmed with admiration of the vast superiority of the Tennessee to those of all rival communities, we shall be in the possession of information which will enable us to know at least as much of the Pygmies as we now know of the Mastodon and the mound builders. All right, there were so many graves, many people were talking about these guys, yet this was never publicized. This never reached your textbooks. This doesn't fit the historical narratives or their theories of evolution. The Smithsonian got involved, and one guy tried to debunk it, say it was all children, and that's what they went with. But this is just one example of the legends and stories and the history of the little people around the world. And we are going to continue reading about more cases. We know America's a true old world, and why wouldn't it have people of different stature here in the oldest land out of the primordial waters? Hope you guys enjoyed the readings today. A lot of interesting stuff here. We know we're talking about giants and pygmies. This is usually left in the realm of conspiracy, but as you guys can see, this was written about in anthropological books and newspaper reports. This may be more than just myth. So thanks for tuning in once again. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.